Hello everyone. In this week, we will discuss graph neural network. This lecture is built based on this reference, graph neural network in particle physics. Before we talk about graph neural network, let's review the common deep learning blocks we have learned in this semester so far. We learned fully connected neural network. The input data structure is one-dimensional vector. We also learned convolutional neural network. For example, we have a two-dimensional image with the three color layers. The data structure is grid element. In the recurrent neural network architecture, the input data is sequential data with time steps entities. For a fully connected network, the relation between the entities are O2O connection. You have weight connect nodes in different layers. Between different layers, the input neuron is connected to each neurons in the next layers. In the case of convolutional neural network, a kernel is applied such that a subset of the grid elements are connected and used to calculate grid element in the next layer. The same kernel is applied to the full image. In the case of recurrent neural network, the output from the previous neurons are used as an input to the next neuron calculations. The convolutional neural network preserves the spatial translation when the kernel is shifted in the grid directions. The kernel will attempt to extract the important features of the image. In the recurrent network, the same recurrent model is applied for each of the sequential data. It can extract the time translation invariance. When we focus on the weight, in the fully connected network, all weights are independent and there's no sharing. For convolutional neural network, the kernel function is reused multiple times across the input. Shared weights are indicated by arrows with the same color. The blue color are used multiple times in each of the sliding kernel calculations, the same as the pink color. In the same relative position of a kernel will be shared between different sliding windows. In the recurrent network case, the same function is also reused across different processing steps. The blue of the previous time step is the same weight as the next time step calculations. The same weight, the pink, are used in each of the time step evolution. Not all the data have one-dimensional feature or the grid element structure or the time sequences structure. When a neuron with a structure that can connect to multiple neurons without obvious layer structure, we naturally think about the graph data structure. Entities of the graph network is node. The relation between the nodes are called edges. The graph network quite often preserves the invariance of the node and edge permutations. There are different graph representations being applied in practical world. For example, a molecule is composed of atoms. The H2O is an oxygen connected to two hydrogens. You can represent H2O with a two hydrogen node and one oxygen node. In the case of mass spring system, you have a spring surrounded with the mass and hanging in a gravitational field pointing in the downward directions. The spring can be represented as a connection of multiple spring segments. And in particular, around this area, the contact between the spring and the mass introduces another relation. The full structure here can be represented with a graph. In the n-body system, there are three different types of the atoms: the blue and green and the purple. Each one of them can be represented as a node. We have three different types of nodes. There are interactions between each of two nodes can be represented as an edge. In the rigid body system, each of the constituent of the rigid body, it can be represented as a node. There's an interaction between the neighborhood node. This interaction can be represented as an edge. The Sentence and parse tree can also be represented as a graph. For example, the sentence, the brown dog jumped. Each of the words can be represented as a node. In order to build the relation between the word and make the connections, there could be a latent node, and this latent node introduces the linking between the word, higher order of the latent space, an image and fully connected scene graph. Each element of each object, an image can be divided into multiple pieces. If we scramble the pieces, it's a puzzle how we can reassemble these separate pieces into the original image. To solve this puzzle, we can introduce a linking between each pair of pieces. In summary, graph data structure is an intuitive way to describe geometry nature of the data. To formulate graph network, first let's define what is graph. A graph can be represented by U, V, and E. U represent graph level attributes. V is the set of nodes or vertices. And MV here represent number of vertices. A graph, E is the set of edges. A node could have multiple edges, and E is the number of edges associated to a vertex, and EK is the case edge attributes. There are two indices represent the receiver node and the sender node between each pair of the edge. There's graph level attributes, vertex level attributes, and edge level attributes. Directed graph is a one-way edge from a sender node to a receiver node, and attributes described property can be encoded as a vector, set, or even another graph. There could be more than one edge between vertices, including self-edges. The sender node and receiver node are identical. Once we define the basic element of graph, the graph network can be assembled from three blocks. First, the edge block computes one output for each edge and aggregates them by their corresponding receiving node. The vertex block computes one output for each node. The global block aggregates the edge and node level outputs, use all that information to update the global attributes of the graph network. From such a construction, there are two major types of functions in the graph network blocks. The update function takes a set of objects with a fixed size representation and applies the same function to each of the elements in the set, resulting in updated representation, also with a fixed size. The second function is called aggregation function. It takes a set of objects and creates one fixed size representation for the entire set. It uses some order invariant function to group together the representation of the object, such as an element-wise sum. To put graph network in math, there are three update functions, one for each edge, vertex, and global block. There's another three aggregation functions, one for each of the edge, vertex, and global block. In practice, the update functions are often implemented as simple trained neural network, while the aggregation functions are typically implemented as a permutation invariant reduction operators, such as element-wise sums, means, or maximums. This cartoon represents a global fully graph network architecture. First, the edge block. In the edge block, the update function of the edge is applied, then follow with a node block to update the node, the edge, and update the vertex will be aggregated with the global attribute to update the final global attribute. Different graph neural architectures. The construction of a different type of graph neural architecture depends on based on these generalized fully graph networks. We can derive different type of the graph neural network. In the case of graph convolutional network, only the vertex and edge are used to update the edge block is aggregate with the updated edge is aggregate into the vertex. In order to update the vertex, the graph convolutional network take the input vertex and edge through the edge block and node block, provide the updated vertex. There's no global block involved into the graph convolutional network. In the case of a message passing graph network, it's continue the construction of the graph convolutional network, but further add the update function in the global block. In addition to vertex output, both attribute is derived in the end of the graph network. In order to apply graph neural network, we have to decide how the data could be expressed as a graph. What are the entities and relations that will be represented as the nodes and edges? What is the required output, that is, edge, node, or graph level predictions? As for the choice about the specific graph neural network architecture, we have to think about whether a global output network required to produce graph level outputs. Should pairwise interactions among nodes be computed, or more graph convolutional network like summation and nonlinear transformation will be used? We need to think about how many message passing steps should be used to propagate information among distant nodes in the graph. There are several data structures in particle physics considered to be nature using graph presentation. For example, the tracking problems, charged particles can deposit hits in multi-layers of the detectors. Each of the energy deposition can be described as a node. The linking between the node can be represented at the edge. When a photon hits the calorimeter or a hadron hits the hadron calorimeter, each of the shower objects can be described as a graph. The energy cell is a node. The linking between the cells formulate the class of a shower. This linking can be described as the edge. Graph can also be used to describe the full event based on the physics object. The physics object of an event, including jets, which is a spread of the particles, or a lepton, for example, muon electrons. Missing transverse energy is the representation of a neutrino, which has no interaction with the detector. The relation between these physics objects can be used to categorize particular physics production process. Graph can also be used for jet classification. A jet is a protocol of a quark or gluons. There are different types of quarks. The constitution of a jet can be described as a node. The linking between the particles, that is, the edge between the nodes, such structure could be used to classify different types of the quarks. In the hands-on activity this week, we will work on the charged particle tracking problem. The goal to cluster sparsely measured hits into trajectory of charged particles. The exercise is based on Dr. Willeman's tutorial. This is a cross-section view of the tracking device in the previous page, and we just look at a quadrant of the detector. The proton moving along the z direction in collision in the origin, that is the center of the detector. There are three different types of the tracking device. The green one is called the pixel detector. There are two barrel detector. The one closer to the beam pipe is called inner barrel. The one further away from the beam pipe is called outer barrel. In addition to the barrel, there are also a disc structure of the detector in the forward regions. When a charged particle goes through each of the layers of the detector, the particle with sufficient energy can create electron-hole pair in the semiconductor detector. a bias voltage is being applied, such ionized electrons and holes will be drifted to the electrodes. Preamplifier and shapers have been applied and then passed into the discriminator. Such a device can be used to measure the ionizing signature of a charge particle. Such a detector can be used to detect ionizing particle. Such a heat signature can be used to reconstruct the trajectory of the charged particles. The challenge of this text is starting from the low hits of the detector, associate the hits to group the hits to each of the individual particle, and eventually find the trajectory particle. The tracker is embedded inside magnetic field. Based on the curving magnitude, we can measure the momentum of the charged particles. Through the curving directions, we can measure the sign of the charge of particles. This is a connecting the dot problem. A simplified version of the tracking can be described as a simplified version of the tracking is shown in this page. Each of the hits can be described as a node. The connection between the node is the edge. The goal here is trying to identify the correct edge to build the trajectory of the particle. This is an edge classification problem. The problem can be very challenging. This is a straightforward problem in this page. However, the real case is very complicated because the density of the particle is quite high. In this event display shows the connecting of all the possible edges between the nearby. In this page shows the connection of all the edges. In this page, it shows all the possible edges in the consecutive layers. The gray are fake edges. They are the edge which associate two nodes have no connections. The red represent the correct edges. Quite naturally, this edge classification problem can be described to solve. In order to solve this problem, a node representation can take the input attribute, and edge representation can take the latent space vector and map out to the output. Then finally, the edge score, which is built based on the latent space feature, can be used to identify the correct edge. Because the graph is sparsely connected from consecutive layers, the message passing model is used. The message passing model is used to solve this problem. The graph is sparsely connected from consecutive layers. The edge representation computed from features at the end, not the representation computed from the sum over all connected edges. Correlates hits information are done through multiple iterations of the graph network. In the literature, 8 iterations have been introduced to solve this problem. In summary, the charged particle tracking is an edge classification problem. Each node represents one hit, with edge constructed between pairs of hits with geometrically plausible relations. Multiple updates of the node representation and edge weight over the graph using the edge weight as a tension. Model learns what are the edges truly connecting hits belonging to the same track. Finally, effectively, we transform this hit clustering problem into an edge classification problem. The data we are going to analyze in the lab is based on a track emerald challenge. It is based on the track emerald. The data we analyze in this lecture and the data we analyze this week is based on the track emerald detector geometry. This is a cross-section view of the detector. The detector is composed of a different detector volume. We have a pixel barrel, an outer barrel, a pixel barrel, an inner strip barrel, and outer strip barrel. And the whole tracker is divided into different detector volume. There is a pixel barrel, pixel end cap, and end cap are symmetric in both 4 regions along the z directions. There is one inner strip barrel and 2 inner strip end cap. There is one outer strip barrel and 2 outer strip end cap. The data has been used for the Track Emerald Particle Tracking Challenge, hosted by CERN. A typical data structure: the 2 important data files. One contains the heat information, describe the heat of the full detector. The 3-dimensional positions of each heat is encoded. The attribute heat also include which detector volume and which layer. In this case, you have 4 layers of the detector. Which module hosts the heat. The other file contain the truth information of the particle, the production vertex of the particle, the momentum of the particle, the charge, and also the total number of hits belonging to the particle, and total number of hits created by this particle. In order to associate the first particle contains 8 hits. There are 8 hits in the hit file should be associated to the particle. Therefore, the particle ID in the hit file can be used to find the association between the particle and the hits. Alright, this is the lecture for this week. To look for more information, please find these 2 references here. Enjoy your lab exercise.